Hello, today we're going to be talking about the contract status reports features available within ICAT. If we look at our start page, we have two reports available that are identified as contract status reports. We have a contract status report in a T&M format, which essentially will track our activity against budget and funding thresholds for our time and materials contracts. And we have a contract status report in the cost format, which will track our activity against budget and funding thresholds for our fixed price and cost reimbursement type contracts. Let's first take a look at the contract status T&M format. For this contract status report, we are essentially looking at the activity on the contract against the budget thresholds and against funding thresholds. Now, the activity that we're tracking essentially is how many hours for each of our billable labor categories have been utilized on the contract for the period ending on the end of the report date. Now, this report date is for January 1st through June 30th, 2008. And that's the period identified in the header of the report, which will in effect be the current period of the report, and that information that's utilized during that period will be displayed in the current column on the report. Any information or activity that was utilized prior to the current report date will be displayed in the prior period column. Our inception to date column is in essence the sum of all prior period activity and all current period activity. And that shows the inception to date activity on the contract. So we can see inception to date how many hours and dollars have been utilized for each of the positions available within the contract and for each of the contract years. So this first grouping, we can see the hours and dollars utilized during the base year of the contract. Second grouping, we can see how many hours and dollars have been utilized during option year 1 of the contract. And then the current period now appears to be in option year 2 of the contract, because we're now getting information for option year 2 in the current column. So here we're tracking the hours and dollars utilized in the current period of the report, and that's for option year 2 of the contract. The third option year is shown here, and of course that's a future period, so there's been no activity at all there. So we're accumulating the inception to date activity in terms of a prior period and current period presentation, and we're tracking that against the contract budget. This contract budget is established based on the hours and dollars available within the contract. So it would be established when the contract is awarded, and then we would add in or detract out any amounts pursuant to any contract modifications. So we'll display that as well. But this budget information essentially displays the hours and dollars available for each of the positions in each of the contract years as established pursuant to the contract. The balance column then simply shows what's remaining. So if we compare our inception to date activity against our budget, we would then see how many hours and dollars are left to be utilized, how much is essentially available within the contract as of the report date that we're showing on the header of the report. Now, the other information that we're tracking is essentially the total amounts of the contract that have been invoiced up to this point in time. We're tracking that against the funded amount of the contract as well as the contract value. Now, many contracts are funded incrementally, so contracting officers typically want to know where the contractor stands in relation to the funded amount. And typically, once the contract funded value has been utilized to the extent of 75% of the funded amount, the contracting officer then needs to take action in order to obligate additional funding available in the contract value. So what we're able to track then is the total amounts billed on the contract against the funded amount to see how much of the funded amount has been utilized in terms of a percentage, as well as the percentage of the funded amount remaining. And we're also displaying that same activity, or that same information, for the contract value. We're showing the percentage of the contract value utilized and the portion remaining. Now, where does the information for this report come from? It all comes out of QuickBooks. But how do we get this budget information into QuickBooks? And where is this information coming from in QuickBooks? Well, the hours and dollars utilized are coming from the invoices in QuickBooks. So the contractor, in order to make use of this feature, needs to record his invoices in this format within QuickBooks. Now, he may not necessarily be doing his invoicing out of QuickBooks, but he at least needs to get this information recorded in the invoice screen in QuickBooks. So, contractor is going to need to set up his billable items, and in QuickBooks, setting up these billable items is done in the item list. And if we look at the item list that we have established, we have it organized by contract at the highest level, and then within this particular contract we have it broken down into the various years of the contract. We have base year, option year 1, option year 2, and option year 3. So each of these years of the contract, base year and the 3 option years, are essentially established as sub-items of the top level item. Then within each year of the contract, we're setting up items for our billable labor categories. And notice that the billable labor categories are the same for each year, but the one distinction that we can see is that for the base year we have certain billing rates established, and for option year 1 those rates have escalated, and for option year 2 those rates have escalated again, and for option year 3 those rates have escalated then again. So we're in essence getting the billing rates for the T&M type contract established in QuickBooks so that as we utilize hours, we can record those hours on invoices, and the rates are already established, so we can then know what the billing rate and what the total amounts billed are occurring. Now, to get this all into the budget screen, what we're really doing is creating estimates in QuickBooks. So if we're coming back over to ICAT, our objective is to see how many hours, or display how many hours are budgeted for each of these billable labor categories for each of the option years of the contract. So in order to get that information to display in the report, we have to enter it into QuickBooks. And the screen where we do that in QuickBooks is the Create Estimate screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on Customers on the menu, and we'll then select Create Estimates. And we'll then select our job. And once we've selected our job, we can then go to the item column and select the items right off the item list. So notice then what we've selected is the 3 base year items, the 3 option year 1 items, the 3 option year 2 items, and the 3 option year 3 items. And for each one of those billing categories, we're then entering the number of hours available for each of these years within the contract as established by the contract. So this computer programmer has 1,880 hours established for the base year. Then for each of the option years, we have another entry. It might be 1,880 or it might be 1,888. But regardless of what it is, the contract establishes how many hours are available, and the contractor essentially just needs to come to this screen and enter the number of hours available. Now, there may be modifications to the contract, and if so, the contractor doesn't need to come back and change this estimate, simply needs to go open up another estimate screen for the same job and enter in any modifications. So for this particular modification, it looks like for option year 3, we added 40 hours for the project manager. That information is entered in the create estimate screen. When we come over to ICAT, ICAT's going to pick that up. It's going to add them all together and bring the total in. So if we look back here at QuickBooks, we can see that for the project manager for option year 3, we initially had 1,840 hours. And then we got a modification to add another 40 hours for option year 3. And when we come over to ICAT, we see that we've picked up the sum total of the two. So we have 1,880 hours available for the project manager in option year 3. So this essentially is where the budget information is coming from. It's coming from the Create Estimate screen within QuickBooks. And you access that by clicking on the Customer item on the menu and then selecting the Create Estimates option. Then you simply enter in the items from a drop-down menu selection. And for each of the billable labor categories that's established in the item list, we then come in and key punch in the number of hours available within the contract. So that, in essence, is our contract status T&M format report.